Today we're going to tear down the Element Enduro. Well, the Element truck has been out for quite a while now, and there's a lot of fantastic builds going on with this. We have started a full custom truck build with this, and of course, in order to do the way that we do it, we had to get rid of the big transmission in the middle to make room for the interior and move a bunch of components around. And of course, what GCM does is we do scale transmission conversions. So no change on this truck. What we've done on this is taken out just about everything you can think of, and we're down to this. So the first things first, in order to get the scale transmission combo to fit into the truck, the first thing that you really need to do is to take off a whole bunch of periphery stuff. I'll tell you what that is right now. So the back half of the truck isn't going to change. There's nothing going to change back here. So everything from the transfer case backwards, you can leave the way that you have it. We've already started to make changes for our custom truck build. But the back half can just remain however you like it. And if you're using the original body for the truck still, this won't change anything. You can continue to use it. That's no problem. Take out all of the components from the middle forward except for the skid plate. Leave the skid plate in place. You can leave the suspension on, leave the links on, and the components that you're going to take out first, you're going to remove the servo tray, which is usually in between the front shock towers. You're going to remove this. You're going to remove the front bumper mount as well as the front bumper, and you can reuse this later if you want to. Remove the front bumper mount. You're going to remove the brace in the center that's sitting right behind the shock towers. And on top of that is this battery tray with the Velcro straps. This will also come out. So all of these components are gone now. And finally, when you get to the skid plate, you're going to take out the 4 screws in the bottom of the motor transmission combination. And then the entire drivetrain setup will come out. And those are the components that you need to start with taking off of the vehicle. So that's the first step. Go ahead and take all that stuff off, and then we'll talk about reassembling the truck with the new parts. So we're going to start with the servo mount first. Basically, this is the piece that you're going to use to replace the original plastic. If I have the original plastic piece here somewhere, there it is. So this piece just simply bolted into the frame on the sides right here. We're using the same configuration here. Just an enormous amount of aluminum beef instead of this soft plastic stuff. The way that this sits in the truck is the same way in the front. You can put your bumper mount back in there. The holes on the original you'll see are actually deeper. They're deeper than the one on the aluminum. The plastic is a little deeper, so depending on where your bumper is sitting on the truck, you may have to trim off the posts on the bumper. The way that this is set up here, the bumper was all the way in on the factory one like this. And so this hole here was used to attach the farthest forward hole on the factory bumper. And when you use that on the GCM bumper, you'll see that it doesn't actually fit all the way in because there's material here in the way. So on the plastic bumper, if you're going to reuse it, you just need to cut off the first hole right there, and then the bumper will fit all the way in. You can see what I mean by this picture. Okay. Now, to install this, now that you have the front bumper mount already out, you're going to install this with the thicker side of the servo right here. This thicker material is going to be on the right hand side of the truck. So you're going to put the 2 screws in there. 2 screws will fit right here, and then you only need the 2 screws on this one side here. That's it, and then you can install your servo and the horn and all those things back together. So the geometry is the same, the suspension cycle is exactly the same, and so no issues there. The servo lengths, the rod lengths are exactly the same, so that's all you got to do there. And then once you have these 2 screws in, do not put in the screws on the left hand side of the frame rail yet. Leave those open. Install these 2, and then you can install the nuts that go on the back of the shock tower screws. You can see here where we've taken out the servo tray, there's now actual nuts in there. They're just regular M3 nuts that we've provided in the kit, and you can install the nuts onto the back of the shock towers. There's the nuts right there. 2 metric 3 nuts that go on the back, and then tighten up the shock towers, and that alone will make the front end really rigid now. You don't have to worry about the floppy shock towers anymore on the Enduro, because the shock towers are going to be hard mounted onto the frame rail with a nut. You're not using the plastic threads that came on the original servo mount. These are not strong enough to hold the rigidity in the front end of the frame. So now that we've replaced those with these metal nuts, it's very strong in the front, very strong. So you have the 2 servo mount screws here. Leave these servo mount screws unassembled. Okay, now we're going to take that on the side and move over to the motor plate setup. So after you've built the LRT2 with the transfer case on the right hand side output, there's a video, you can see the video link on top right there. That video will show you how to assemble this entire package. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take the the motor mount brackets, these little tiny hammerhead looking things. You're going to take these little tiny brackets and assemble them onto the motor plate like this. You just put the screw through from the back side into the hammerhead bracket there and leave it loose. This is really important. Leave this loose. There's lots and lots of thread there, so thread it through and let it be loose for a couple of millimeters, just like that. Same thing on this side. Both of those hammerhead brackets should be loose right now. And then you're going to go to the back of the LRT2 transfer case, and you're going to add on the rear screw mount at the bottom of the LRT2. So this bracket simply screws right on. The hardware is included in your kit. It's a little 2.5 millimeter button head screw, and you're just going to screw that on like this, and that's it. Screw holes down. Remember to put the little miniature set screws in the top using the included wrench, and the case screw that does not have to be extremely tight. It just has to close the case halves to keep the dirt out. That's the assembly for the back of the vehicle, or the back of the transmission. And you'll see here that the holes in the bottom here are ready for the skid plate, and then in the front we can take the hammerhead mounts and drop them right into the frame rail. And that's what we're going to do next. So now we have the servo mount in, and we have the brackets assembled onto the transmission and motor plate, and we're going to install this into the frame rail. So we have left the screws out on the left side of the vehicle, and the reason is because now we can open the frame and actually fit the rest of the components into the truck. The first thing we're going to do is take this transmission setup and actually just slide it in between the rails with the hammerheads facing the rail. Just like that. Just kind of slide it in there, and you want to have the hammerhead brackets actually facing out. And then we're going to take the little M3x8 screws and actually just put them into the frame, and attach them into the hammerhead bracket. So I'm going to put this in here and just line up that bracket. Everything is loose now, so it doesn't matter if it's lined up perfectly. It's already loose. It's fine. Do not tighten these yet either. Leave those, make contact with the frame, and then back it off a couple of turns so it's loose. And then we'll do the same thing on this side. I'm going to line up that little hammerhead bracket and put the screw in. And so now what I've got is the brackets are loose and the screws are loose right here, and they're both in, they're both loose, and that's perfect. We'll leave it just like that. And then we're going to move to the bottom of the truck. So in the bottom center of the skid plate, what you want to do is take the flathead screws that are included and drop them into those holes. They're a bit of a tight fit into the factory skid plate. Drop the 2 screws in, and then you'll see really clearly here that the transmission needs to be tucked in forward as best you can. So using the wiggle room you have on the front of the engine mount, just give that a jiggle until it sits all the way forward, and now we can actually tighten the screws in the bottom. I'm just holding the transmission in with this hand, and you can see the screws just go right through. Now they're all perfectly lined up, and so I'm going to drop in those 2 screws into the bottom of the skid plate mount. That's the next thing. And now that that's done, now I can actually finish the motor plate assembly. So I'm going to go to the back of the motor plate mounts, those little hammerhead mounts, and I'm going to tighten up both sides of the hammerhead mounts. That's next. And then I'm going to move my attention to the frame rail mount, and I'm going to tighten that up on both sides. And then the last thing to add hardware to is going to be this servo mount here in the front. So I'm going to drop the screws into here, just like this, and get those assembled here. We'll just tighten that up, just like that, and I'll get the second one done here. And that is the last step for the frame bolts assembly, is right here. So now what we've done now is we have hard mounted the skid plate to this aluminum bracket. We have a full aluminum transmission. We now have aluminum motor mounts, these little hammerhead mounts that are right in the frame. And now we have a solid billet aluminum servo mount in the front. And the shock towers are also assembled with steel nuts on the back of the hardware. And what we've done now is we've really stiffened up the entire truck. Besides the fact that we have our GCM overdrive transmission and T-case here, which I think we had already for 4 years, before Associated even did it, we now can drop in this all metal parts and get rid of a lot of plastic. We're getting rid of this, we're getting rid of this, we're getting rid of this, and all of this plastic is gone, and we're replacing it all with this solid billet aluminum stuff, and now the frame rigidity is just crazy. There is no more flex in the frame at all. I'm trying, and there's no more flex in the frame. This entire thing is now completely rigid. It's all squared in and bolted, and that alone will give you a severe predictability increase in the way that the truck drives. Without having the frame flex, it's a major bonus. Now, this transmission comes from the factory with an overdrive gear set already built into it. And so what we've done is we have the opportunity now to drop in the LRT2. We've done that. We can put the factory drive shafts back on. I'll show you that in a minute. But this transmission already comes with a gear set to give you 11% overdrive in the front. And make no mistake, the GCM LRT2 transfer case is the only transfer case on the market that will give you an 11% output overdrive automatically. We've had this already for 4 years. I'm glad that Associated finally came on board with their gearing set, but the reality is we've been doing this forever and we already know it works. And the good news is, by putting this into your truck, you're not going to change your overdrive options performance because we've already got it in here. It's been like that forever. Now, let's talk about the drive shafts. So the drive shafts on this truck are made out of these plastic cases, and then they have an aluminum extruded slide. The design is actually really smart, and it also has a 2.5 millimeter hole in the end, which is really smart because you can add hardware to it quite easily, and I'll tell you why that's important. What we've done is we've taken this very thin LRT2 transfer case and we've replaced a very wide original transmission with it. So that means the drive shaft lengths are going to change. The rear drive shaft length, it has to get longer, and the front drive shaft length has to get very slightly longer, but the back one has to come ahead probably 15 millimeters. So what we've done here is I simply added a screw. You can use a piece of plastic spacer, you can use a shock eye, swivel balls from rod ends, there's lots of things you can do. And basically you just stick them down inside the drive shaft. So the drive shaft has a nice hole in it, and you want to make sure that when the slide comes in and out now with the new length of drive shaft, that it doesn't fall out of the other end. So you don't want to have this problem where the drive shaft is just barely engaged. So what you do to fix the problem is you can put a spacer inside, or you can actually put a screw in the end of the aluminum shaft so that you have a permanent spacer on one side, and then the drive shaft can slide freely. You've got no issues. It works great. If you want to, you can put a piece of foam in the end. I would suggest that you use hard plastic spacers or a screw in the end to make sure that the drive shaft doesn't start to come out too far, out of the spline too far. They still slide. There's still lots of slide. But by adding a screw in the end of the aluminum, you're actually making it center better for the new length that you're using. And this works great. And that's exactly the setup that we're using on the Enduro to replace the drive shafts. We're using all the factory parts with simple tricks like this with spacers or with a screw added into the end of the aluminum, and it works great. And so we're certainly looking forward to seeing your builds using the LRT2 in the Enduro, and happy trucking.